Chapter 1: Foundations of Multicultural Education. After this chapter, you will understand the diversity of students in schools across the United States and recognize the importance of respecting the diversity of students and their families. You will describe the role that culture plays in the lives of students and how you can build on their culture to support their social and emotional development as well as their academic learning. You will consider different ideologies for integrating diverse cultural groups into the United States over the past century and identify ideologies that address diversity. You will analyze the differences between meritocracy, equality, and social justice and describe how they are applied in schools. You will identify the obstacles to creating a just and equal classroom and explore strategies for overcoming them. And you will describe the characteristics of multicultural education and evaluate the importance of multicultural education for all students. Schools in the United States are becoming increasingly diverse. Black and brown children now comprise more than half of all students in pre-K through 12th grade public schools in the United States. Racial diversity will continue to grow in our country. By 2050, half of the U.S. population will be people of color. Latinx and Asians are the fastest growing minority populations. At this time, our schools are primarily white and female, with 75% of teachers falling into these two categories. The lack of diversity in our teachers poses a problem as we work to meet the needs of our students and help them develop positive identities. We know that students learn best from teachers who look like them and who reflect their cultural and ethnic identities. Racial diversity varies greatly between regions in our country and can even vary greatly between schools within a school district. In addition, schools continue to experience increased religious diversity. Religious beliefs and values can influence thoughts about the curriculum, dress code, concepts of gender roles, school holidays, and expectations for behaviors. Not all families agree that secular schools provide an appropriate education to their children, and sometimes school curriculum and values can be in direct opposition to a family's faith. The U.S. income gap continues to grow, and students are increasingly experiencing diverse financial situations. By 2016, 52% of students were eligible for free or reduced price lunch because their families were at or near the income limits of the federal poverty level. Income disparities impact families of color at greater levels. Almost half of African American and Latinx students attend a high poverty school, in which 75% of students are eligible for free or reduced price lunches. Classroom teachers will also serve students with a variety of abilities and special needs. Approximately 13.2% of American students receive special education services. As a classroom teacher, your job will be to implement a student's IEP by providing accommodations and modifications to support these learners in the least restrictive environment. You will also collaborate with special educators to co-teach, co-plan, and develop helpful classroom supports. Your students' cultures will also impact their learning and behavior in the classroom. Teachers should take time to get to know their students' families and communities. This will help you plan culturally responsive instruction. Of course, every student is an individual who is influenced by multiple cultures and perspectives. Teachers cannot make assumptions about students solely based on the membership of one cultural group. For these reasons, we must provide students with a multicultural education. Multicultural education means providing supportive instruction and curriculum that promotes diversity, social justice, equality, democracy, and respect for all students and their families. Culture defines who we are, how we react to situations, and expectations for how others in our group will act. Culture impacts everything we think, feel, and do. Culture dictates appropriate behavior for members of the group. Culture determines how we think, feel, and behave in society. This includes the way we dress, interact with others, and communicate. We feel comfortable with people who share our culture because we understand the meaning behind their actions and words. We also share similar patterns of thought, a common history, and even the same interests. Culture imposes order and meaning on our experiences. Culture includes our languages and patterns of communication. Culture predicts how others will behave in certain situations. Our culture determines how late is too late, how to give attention, and how to respect authority. Misunderstandings between cultures may be minor, but may lead to assumptions about the individual. For example, a teacher may assume that a student is uninterested or not paying attention if they do not make eye contact or ask questions. However, these actions may be a sign of respect, depending on the student's culture. There are 3 characteristics of culture. Culture is learned from those closest to us, including our families and caregivers. From the time we were infants, we began absorbing our culture. Culture is shared. Culture helps us feel connected to members of our group, so we can live together with ease. Culture is dynamic. Culture can shift due to influences of technology, politics, power, and the influences of other cultures. Some cultures change more quickly than others. Cultural identity helps us to answer the question, who am I? Cultural identity is our description of who we are in relation to ourselves, in relation to others, and in relation to our cultural world. Your cultural identity is influenced by your race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, native language, disability status, religion, and age. In addition, your cultural identity is influenced by your roles in society, such as mom and teacher, your political affiliation, your physical characteristics, your work ethic, and your intellectual ability. We belong to multiple subgroups of culture. We belong to many groups that interact with one another and impact our behavior. You most likely have a dominant culture that is influenced by your many other subcultures. Sometimes your membership in one group will conflict with your membership of another group. This can lead to criticism or conflict. For example, our families may think we are not religious enough. Our identities in any single group are influenced by our historical and lived experiences. Intersectionality is the interactions between our group memberships that impact our cultural identity and place in society. Two people from any cultural group may be very different due to intersectionality and participation in subcultures. Your identity is fluid and shifts across time based on group members and the dominant cultural influences in your life. The dominant culture in the United States has evolved from Anglo-Saxon and Western European traditions. Our culture has been influenced by the English language and English common law. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant values and characteristics have created American culture. Some would describe West culture as bigoted, segregationist, and exclusionary. Others would describe the culture as having modesty, chivalry, humility, and public-spiritedness. American culture has also been influenced by the other cultural subgroups in our country. You can see this in terms of food, dress, and music. WASPs have claimed the power to set the rules and norms that govern society. Dominant groups are treated as superior to other subcultures. One key feature of the dominant group is individualism. This is the belief that everyone is in control of their own destiny and can achieve whatever they wish with hard work. It is believed that people who don't work hard will be poor or unsuccessful. Individualism fosters the following personality traits: ambition, competitiveness, industrialness, self-reliance, and appreciation of a good life. Financial success is a goal for most people in the dominant culture. Another key feature of the dominant culture is freedom. This is the ability to choose our values, behaviors, and ideas. Communication tends to be direct and confrontational, and moral actions tend to be seen in black and white. During the civil rights movement, marginalized groups such as people of color, women, and people with disabilities united to demand equal rights and equal protection under the law. The struggle for the same protection as the dominant cultural groups continues today. Our cultures impact how we think, act, and feel. When we begin to see our culture as superior, rather than just a different approach to a situation, the differences become political and sometimes oppressive. As we develop an understanding of different cultures, we can begin to see everyone as equal and deserving of freedom and power. Cultural pluralism. Cultural pluralism is the theory of accepting many cultures in a society separate of one another. Cultural pluralism is practiced in the United States. Cultural pluralism is not easily developed and may result in conflicts between subcultures. Cross-cultural contact will happen in schools and workplaces. Assimilation requires immigrants to completely accept and adopt the dominant culture. We learn this through inculturation and socialization. Inculturation is the process of acquiring new characteristics of a given culture and becoming competent in its language and ways of behaving and knowing. Socialization is the process of learning social norms of the culture. Structural assimilation occurs when the predominant cultural group shares primary relationships with the second group. This strategy has worked for voluntary immigrants. Involuntary immigrants, such as enslaved peoples or Native Americans whose lands were forcibly taken, have faced discrimination, making structural assimilation almost impossible. Typically, white European immigrants have structurally assimilated after just one generation. Some ethnic groups have tried to remain separate from the dominant culture. Interactions with the dominant culture through schools, businesses, and society lead to influences from the dominant culture, leading to structural assimilation. For the most part, the degree of assimilation is determined by individuals and families as they decide how much they wish to reflect the dominant culture's dress, food, and mannerisms. Historically, U.S. schools have promoted assimilation by teaching English and WASP patterns of behavior. Our school's curriculum has predominantly featured WASP historical figures and events. Today, parents and students are advocating for curriculum and teaching methods that reflect the cultural diversity of our societies. Culture acts as our lens to see the world, so naturally, we begin to judge the world and other humans through our cultural lenses. As we evaluate other cultures based on our own, it is easy to begin thinking of our culture as superior and other cultures as inferior. This is known as ethnocentrism. First, we must learn to respect other cultures and see their patterns of behavior and thinking as alternatives to our own. This will increase harmony between cultural groups and help our own selves function in more than one cultural group. A Native American proverb states, "Never judge another man until you walk a mile in his moccasins." This proverb reminds us of the importance to seek understanding before passing judgment. Cultural relativism is to see another culture as if we are a member of that culture. This requires us to acknowledge that another culture's ways of thinking and behaving are valid. First, we must be knowledgeable about our own cultures. Then, we must interact with other cultures so as to learn how to see the world from other perspectives. People who can successfully navigate several cultures are considered to be multicultural. Having proficiencies in multiple cultures allows one to draw on a broad range of abilities and make choices as determined by that particular situation. People with competencies in several cultures develop a fuller appreciation of the range of cultural competencies available to all people. Many people from oppressed groups are forced to become bicultural at school and in the workforce. Multiculturalism values the cultural values and beliefs of diverse groups. When classroom teachers form their instruction and curriculum based on their own culture, they create cultural borders for students. Cultural borders are the boundaries based on cultural beliefs that may limit an individual's understanding of persons from a different background or culture. Education must become multicultural, being able to value our students' cultures and move away from a perspective of cultural dominance. As we learn to function comfortably in different cultures, we may be able to cross cultural borders, bringing the students' cultures into the classroom. We live in a democracy that allows people to govern themselves at the local, state, and federal level. A democracy requires citizens to be educated, informed, think critically, and participate actively in the political process. In our democracy, we believe in equality. Our government is supposed to ensure the rights of its citizens, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and equal protection under the law. These rights have not always been protected for every citizen, particularly for people of color and women. The concepts of equality and individualism are central themes of political discourse in a democratic society. However, citizens must be concerned with more than their own individual freedoms. Sometimes individualism and equality oppose one another. There are two philosophical thoughts on equality. The first states that equality is inevitable, and achievement is based on personal merit. Throughout history, we have witnessed, time and again, people who have had more and people who have had much less. The second thought is that equality for all people can be achieved by providing access to better paying jobs, higher quality education, and healthcare. Meritocracy is the belief that people who work hard and are intelligent or talented will succeed due to their own merits. Meritocracy does not see advantages of wealth or privilege as factors to success. Meritocracy values the individual over the group. The individual works hard and has the skills needed for social mobility, no matter his or her background. Stories of poor immigrants who became successful Americans remind us of this American dream. Unfortunately, social mobility is much harder today than it was in the past. The second dimension of meritocracy is competition. People are rewarded for high grades, athletic abilities, or artistic talents. The third dimension of meritocracy involves internal characteristics of motivation and drive. External factors such as poverty are simply to be overcome and not attributed to the lack of success. Equal access to education applies to meritocracy as well. The belief that all children have an equal opportunity to learn and achieve makes education a competition. Students are seen as highly successful or not, depending on grades and test scores. Equal access to education does not take into account the factors of poverty or racism that make achievement in schools much more difficult for many children. These children start the educational competition behind their white affluent peers. Patterns of inequality are a reflection of how resources and political power are built into the political system. Children with advantages at birth are likely to maintain those same advantages throughout adulthood. Equality suggests that everyone has the same access to education, healthcare, and resources needed to grow healthy families and children. Equality means providing everyone with the same opportunities in life. Traditionally, we have believed that our schools could address the problems of inequality. At this time, our school systems have not yet solved these problems. To help our students, we must focus on providing all students with highly qualified teachers, access to a challenging curriculum that reflects their experiences and perspectives, educational technology, and caring faculty and staff who never give up. Social justice respects the dignity of every human and works to promote fairness and political power to every individual. Social justice means every citizen is treated with respect and dignity. Social justice means students are educated with similar resources. Social justice means all students have access to quality housing, food, and health care that they need to be successful in school. Social justice would mean schools in low-income areas have the same resources as schools in high-income areas. At this time, students in more affluent schools benefit from parent-led fundraisers, while schools in low-income schools receive fewer job applications from qualified teachers and fewer resources and after-school programs. Conflict and power struggles between groups can lead to inequalities in society and in our classrooms. Prejudice refers to negative attitudes individuals hold toward another for their differences. Members of a group may be stereotyped and thought of negatively. Prejudice can lead to fear, hatred, and mistreatment of others. Discrimination occurs when people act on their prejudice. For example, a teacher may hold high expectations for members of one student group and low expectations for members of another group. As teachers, our role is to consider our own personal biases and work to treat all students and families with kindness and justice. Privilege is a system of advantages provided to certain groups. In the U.S., white and European Americans have benefited from this system, but most do not see the advantages they have received. White Americans have generally benefited from an educational curriculum that has reflected their culture and racial identities. They have also held most positions of power within institutions. Hate occurs when members of a dominant group intentionally victimize or harm members of a non-dominant group. This can include verbal or physical harassment, hate crimes, and even killings. In 2019, 49% of hate crimes were directed at African Americans, according to the U.S. government. Anti-bias training for teachers and students is an important step to reducing hate-based crimes. Cultures and lived experiences impact student academic readiness and interest in the curriculum. Multicultural education values student diversity and works to meet the needs of all learners. Multicultural education believes cultural differences have strength and value. Multicultural education believes that schools should be a model for expression of human rights and respect for cultural and group differences. Multicultural education promotes social justice and equality for all people, and it should be the primary importance in both the curriculum and teaching methods. Multicultural education holds that attitudes and values necessary for participation in a democratic society should be taught in schools. Multicultural education believes that teachers are the key to student learning. Teachers help shape student attitudes, values, and beliefs to help students become productive citizens. Multicultural education believes that educators should work with families to provide schools and curriculum focused on multiculturalism, social justice, and equity. Multicultural education is for all students, even students of the dominant cultural group, who can benefit from learning about concepts of inequality and cultural dominance. Multicultural education has been around since the early 20th century. Multicultural education has its roots in the early work of African American scholars, intercultural educational curriculums, and ethnic study courses. Throughout much of our history, schools were seen as a tool for assimilating immigrants into the dominant culture. Woodson, Du Bois, and Wesley advocated for studies and curriculum to promote Black culture. Through this, historically Black colleges and universities were formed. After World War II, some schools and curriculums began to promote intergroup relations to reduce prejudice. Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, as well as the Civil Rights Movement, brought renewed interest to intergroup relationships. Before this, students from diverse backgrounds were seen through a deficit lens, and families were blamed for not providing their children with the advantages they needed to be successful. Programs to address disadvantages began to appear, known as compensatory education. Title I and Head Start are examples of such federal programs. Today, schools are held accountable for providing a multicultural education to all students. All students need opportunities to learn about their backgrounds, histories, and contributions from people of their own cultures and ethnic groups. Standards-based education brought on new conversations about multicultural education. Which historical figures should be included in the standards? Which historical themes and cultural values should be highlighted within the curriculum? Sometimes multicultural education is criticized for focusing too much on similarities and not recognizing differences. Currently, there are three main schools of thought regarding multicultural education: critical pedagogy, anti-racist education, and critical race theory. Critical pedagogy involves a curriculum that supports students who have historically been marginalized by society. Anti-racist education is a movement to remove racist practice from schools, including tracking, inequitable funding, and segregation of schools. Critical race theory promotes the study of the interactions between race and power in relation to economics, political structures, and history. Multicultural education promotes critical thinking to ensure that education serves all students equally. Multicultural education attempts to incorporate critical pedagogy, anti-racist education, and critical race theory into its practices and beliefs. The Every Student Succeeds Act holds schools accountable for achievement of every student. Schools must report test scores by race, gender, English proficiency, disability, and socioeconomic status. Parents can choose to transfer students from low-performing schools to higher-performing schools after 3 years of low test scores. All teacher preparation programs now include goals and proficiencies for becoming a multicultural educator. Future educators must develop skills, attitudes, and beliefs for supporting diversity and learning differences. Teacher preparation programs will include opportunities to showcase learning through portfolios and demonstrate careful reflection. Teachers who can reflect on their own practices report improvement on their overall teaching. Effective teachers are able to change their teaching strategies when students are not learning. Self-reflection will be a critical focus of this course and is a critical skill for improving your teaching.